I had a question come from a client the other day. How am I doing financially compared to others? That's exactly what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be digging into data showing how much the average American has saved at 50, 55, and 60. But before we get into the numbers, let me tell you something that most people don't realize. These averages don't mean what you think. If you're measuring retirement readiness solely by comparing yourself to the average, you may be using only a partial lens. It can be informative, but it won't tell you the full story. And that's why we're going to be walking through how much the average American has saved. But then we're going to be talking about some critical benchmarks like 500,000. How many people have reached that mark? $1 million. How many people have reached that mark? And we'll be talking about what these numbers mean as to how prepared you might be for retirement. And it will talk about how we can set up personal benchmarks to identify where you truly stand. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Joe Bogan. I'm a certified financial planner. Over the last decade, I've led more than 100 financial planning consultations on retirement. And if there is one thing that I hear repeatedly, it's this: am I falling behind? So in today's video, we are going to be cutting through the averages, the anxiety, the guesswork, and giving you a clear picture of whether you are on track or not. So let's start with the numbers. Of course, Fidelity always releases data on the average 401k balance, but that doesn't paint the whole picture. I see this in the news all the time, and the problem with this data is it is excluding IRAs, Roths, taxable brokerage accounts from the average savings number. Thankfully, the Federal Reserve offers a more comprehensive data set. And according to their data, the median retirement savings for someone age 50 is about $180,000 saved and invested across all accounts. At 55, that number jumps to roughly $225,000, and by 60, around $240,000. On the surface, that number may sound reasonable, but here's the problem. Retirement isn't about how you compare to others. Sure, a comparison can give you a momentary boost, and it could also make you feel panic if you're not quite there, but it doesn't answer the only question that really matters. Are you ready? But what if we just raised the bar and looked at some higher benchmarks? If you're watching this, the chances are that you probably aspire to be more than average financially. And most people have heard that you need $1 million to retire or $500,000 to retire. You've probably heard something like that at least once in your life. So in a moment, I'm going to explore the data as to what percentile of the US population have achieved $500,000 in $1 million. And what are the problems as well as benefits compared to using this as your retirement readiness benchmark? But before we do that, let me offer you something valuable. Have you ever looked at your savings and wondered whether you're ahead or behind, or you're just unsure? We've made it real simple to get clarity. Just click the link below and fill out a short questionnaire, and I will personally send you a 5-minute mini financial planning review, walking you through some basic numbers to identify your progress and what, if anything, you should be thinking about next. Now, back to the benchmarks. According to recent consumer sentiment data, only 22% of individuals have saved at least $500,000. Now, here's what's surprising. Out of this segment of the population, 70% of them with more than $500,000 feel anxious about whether or not they are ready for retirement. Let that sink in. Most people with twice the national average in savings still don't feel ready for retirement. And according to the same research, only 9% of US households have saved over $1 million. And according to a recent couple of surveys, the average American believes that they need anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million to retire comfortably. So what's the truth? Are fewer than 91% of households not ready to retire at all? Well, I've worked with many clients with all different levels of wealth, and I've had clients that have $5 million saved and still feel behind because their neighbors were a lot wealthier. And that's the trap of comparison, especially in the consumer-driven culture that we live in. Everyone is trying to signal their success and their wealth. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that savings isn't alone. It's not going to give us the answer. It's not about the size of your account. It's about how your savings align with your unique retirement needs. Can your savings support the life that you want once the paychecks from work stop? These comparisons or benchmarks don't account for unique factors in each person's plan, such as pensions or social security, home equity, or rentaling. More importantly, they ignore how your lifestyle, healthcare need, and life expectancy influence your plan. And here's where it gets dangerous. Relying solely on these averages or benchmarks can create a false sense of security or even needless fear. I've personally done dozens and dozens of plans this year alone, and I've seen clients who have hit that average and assume they're fine. I've also seen others with seven-figure portfolios who feel behind. And this is because they're using someone else's blueprint. What people actually want isn't a big number. It's the certainty and the confidence that when you stop working, you can live the life that you want to live and that you've earned. And clarity doesn't come from just hitting an arbitrary average. It comes from understanding what retirement is actually going to cost you. And that's why we use something called the retirement confidence curve in our financial planning process. It shifts the focus from how much do I have to how much will I need? And can my savings reliably cover my spending goals? So let's break it down. The retirement confidence curve starts with your guaranteed sources of income. So we look at things like Social Security and pensions, and we compare that to your expected lifestyle costs in retirement. We look at your current cost of living and what housing, travel, healthcare might look like in retirement. From there, we can compare these expenses to your guaranteed cost of living in retirement. From that, we can identify if there's a gap and how big that gap is. We can use that gap to determine what your number will be. You might be tempted to use a rule of thumb like the 4% rule to estimate what you need. In my experience, those rules are often too rigid or conservative, and they don't account for how spending pattern might change over time. Early in retirement, people are often spending a lot more than middle or late retirement because of travel, lifestyle expenses, and towards the end of retirement, people might face rising healthcare costs with end-of-life care. Meanwhile, there may be Social Security that doesn't come in immediately, may phase in, and it adjusts with inflation, and it could depend on your claiming strategy. So what we do is we actually model a lifetime of cash flows, and we create year-by-year withdrawal rates and analyze that and average it out over time. And then from there, we can determine how much savings you need to be able to sustain those withdrawals throughout life. You might have high withdrawals in year one, but depending on how your plan shapes up, that may not be as big of an issue. With this process, we've helped lots of people. Just last month, I met a couple with $600,000 saved, and they assumed that they couldn't retire because they read an article that told them they needed over $1 million. When we actually walked through their expenses and we factored in Social Security and ran the numbers, we realized that they could retire at the end of this year. And that moment of clarity is what really changes everything. I've seen it happen again and again. So here's what we've learned. Yes, the average savings for people between 50 and 60 is interesting. It's generally around $200,000, but it's not your answer. Even being in the top 10% at around $1 million or more doesn't guarantee you are ready for retirement. Because retirement isn't about averages, it's about alignment. The good news, you don't have to keep guessing. If you want to really know whether you're on track to retire at 55 or 60 or later, click the link below. Fill out a short form, and I will personally send you a completely free 5-minute video that is personalized around some of your basic variables. It'll walk you through where you stand and what next steps may be high value for your situation. No pressure, no overwhelm, just a complimentary, no strings attached video. Just real insight tailored to your retirement life.